Be me, 22 Monica, feminist exchange student, studying economics, supposed to be the best year of my life. The university promised me a spot in a dorm, a nice, quiet, single room in the international student housing. I had it all planned out. Pictures looked great online. It was going to be my base of operations for a year of academic excellence and cultural immersion. Land in the new country, jet-lagged but excited. Get to the housing office, give them my name. The lady behind the counter types for what feels like an eternity. She frowns, types some more. Her frown deepens. She looks up at me over her glasses with that specific look of bureaucratic pity. There seems to have been an administrative error. My heart sinks. I already know where this is going. Long story short, my reserved room was double booked. Then the person who got it checked in early. Then the entire international dorm filled up. Then all the other female dorms filled up. They had one single available room left in the entire university housing system. One? She tells me it's only temporary. A few weeks, maybe a month, until something else opens up. It's in a building on the far side of campus, an older building, the all-male dormitory. I just stared at her. I asked if she was serious. She assured me she was, and that there was nothing else she could do. My mind was racing. An entire building full of guys. The noise, the mess, the constant low-level aggression I'd read so much about. It felt like a trap. I protested, of course. I mentioned safety concerns, privacy, the basic principle of the thing. All I got was a helpless shrug and a form to sign. Looked up the cost of renting an apartment off campus. My scholarship and savings would be gone in 2 months, tops. It was either this or a flight home in disgrace. I signed the form. But I made a decision right then and there. I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to be an observer. I would document everything. This wasn't a living situation. It was a field study into the male habitat. I'd finally get to see the so-called toxic masculinity up close. My private notes would become an indictment. The taxi drops me off. The building looks exactly how I imagined, a grim concrete block from a bygone era. I drag my suitcases inside. The smell hits me first. It's a complex blend of stale pizza, some kind of industrial-strength deodorant, and a faint underlying note of damp towels. The hallway is long and dimly lit. Doors are covered in band posters and faded memes. From behind one, I can hear the sounds of a video game, shouts not of anger, but of intense concentration and occasional frustration. I find my room at the very end of the hall. It's small, sparse, with a window overlooking a parking lot. It's a cell. I unpack, feeling a growing sense of dread. This is going to be a long year. The first few days, my worst fears were confirmed. The place was a case study in entropy. The shared kitchen was a disaster zone. The sink was perpetually filled with a random assortment of plates and pans. The counter was sticky. The trash can was overflowing, with a sort of satellite system of pizza boxes orbiting it. Classic. The weaponized incompetence I'd heard about, the expectation that someone else, a woman, a cleaner, a magical kitchen fairy, would eventually deal with it. They were so used to being catered to, they didn't even see the filth they lived in. I documented it all with pictures on my phone. Exhibit A. The bathroom was functional. That's the best I can say. Someone was at least cleaning it on a schedule, but the ambient chaos was ever present. I decided to conduct my first real experiment, a simple one. I made myself a cup of tea, drank it in my room. Then I took the empty mug, rinsed it lightly, and placed it in the already full sink. Just one mug. My mug. My hypothesis. It would sit there until it grew its own civilization. It would become a silent testament to their collective apathy. I gave it a week, maybe 2. The next morning, I went to the kitchen to get some breakfast. I glanced at the sink. My mug was gone. I felt a small, weird jolt of confusion. I looked around. There it was, sitting on the drying rack next to the sink. Perfectly clean, perfectly dry, sitting alongside a few other plates and bowls. My mind immediately started searching for an explanation. It had to be an outlier, a statistical anomaly. Maybe there was one guy on the floor who was a neat freak. Maybe his own mess tolerance had been breached and he'd washed everything in a fit of pique. It didn't fit the narrative. I decided to watch. That evening, I left my door slightly ajar. My room had a decent view of the kitchen entrance. Around 7 p.m., a guy I'd mentally labeled Brett walked in. He was one of the bigger guys on the floor, always in gym shorts and a tank top, the stereotypical jock, basically. The kind of guy who probably thought feminism was a brand of shampoo. I watched as he started cooking. He had a huge container of chicken and what looked like a dozen eggs. The whole process was methodical, efficient. No mess, no fuss. When he finished, he ate standing at the counter, scrolling on his phone. Then he went to the sink. He washed his pan, his plate, his fork. And then he just kept going. He put on a pair of headphones, turned on some music, and washed every single dirty dish that was in the sink. A pan left by someone else, a couple of bowls, a cutting board. He didn't sigh. He didn't mutter under his breath. He didn't make a big show of it. He just cleaned everything, wiped down the counter, put the drying rack in order, and left. The entire process took maybe 15 minutes. It was a quiet act of service, performed for no audience, except for me, the secret one. I sat in my room, completely baffled. This didn't compute. Where was the entitlement? Where was the expectation that someone else would clean up after him? He hadn't just cleaned his mess. He'd cleaned up the collective mess without complaint. I wrote it down in my notes, but I couldn't categorize it. It was just an anomaly. A week or so later, I had my next strange encounter. I was walking down the hall, coming back from a late class. One of my neighbors, a guy from a few doors down, was coming out of his room. I hadn't really interacted with him. He was quiet, always looked at the floor when he walked, and generally seemed to want to be invisible. I'd pegged him as one of the potentially dangerous ones, the quiet, resentful type. I named him Anthony in my notes. The hallway is narrow. We were on a direct collision course. I instinctively tensed up, ready for that awkward shuffle, or worse, for him to just barrel through, expecting me to be the one to move. The classic male assertion of physical space. Instead, the moment he saw me, he stopped. He didn't just step aside. He plastered himself against the wall, tucking his arms in, making himself as small as possible. He looked down at his shoes, waiting for me to pass. He was giving me the entire width of the hallway. It wasn't politeness. It felt like something else. Fear. Like he was terrified of accidentally brushing against me, of infringing on my space in any way. He was actively trying to negate his own physical presence. I walked by, and he didn't move until I was several feet past him. It was the opposite of aggression. It was a complete abdication of presence. I got back to my room, feeling weirdly unsettled. My theory wasn't just being challenged. It was being presented with data that didn't fit any of my models. I started to pay more attention, not looking for evidence to confirm my bias, but just watching. I began to see that the perceived chaos was actually a complex, self-regulating system. It wasn't that there were no rules. It was that the rules were unwritten, enforced by a shared understanding. One night, I saw a guy finish the last of the milk. The next day, a new, full gallon appeared in the fridge. No notes, no angry texts in a group chat. It was just understood. You finish it, you replace it. Someone was playing music really loud late one night, around 1 a.m. I was about to go bang on the door. Before I could, I heard a phone buzz with a notification. A few seconds later, the music volume dropped to a barely audible murmur. I later found out they had a floor-wide group chat. The message wasn't an angry complaint. It was just, "Yo, man, got an 8 a.m. exam." And the response was an immediate correction. No argument, no deal with it. Just mutual respect for a stated need. This wasn't the anarchy I'd anticipated. It was a low-friction society built on a foundation of unspoken reciprocity. They treated each other with a baseline of respect that didn't require constant negotiation or emotional labor. My grand experiment, my documentation of toxicity, was failing spectacularly. I decided I had to be more direct. I had to provoke a reaction to prove they were just hiding their true nature. One evening, I went into the common room. A few of the guys were there, Brett, the quiet guy Anthony, and a couple of others. They were playing some kind of co-op zombie game on a big TV, intense focus on their faces. I sat down on one of the worn-out couches, opened my laptop, and put on a famous feminist lecture from YouTube. I didn't use headphones. I played it through the laptop speakers, loud enough to be clearly audible over the game audio. The lecture was one of the fiery ones, full of academic language about patriarchal structures, male privilege, and the inherent violence of the cis-hetero paradigm. I braced myself. I was ready for the eye rolls, the sarcastic comments, the arguments. I was ready for them to tell me to shut it off. I was ready for the confrontation that would finally prove my point. Nothing. One of the guys playing glanced over at my screen for a second, a flicker of mild curiosity in his eyes, and then immediately looked back at the game. Brett didn't even turn his head. Anthony, who was sitting in a corner chair reading a book, just seemed to shrink a little further into himself. The only reaction came from the guy with the controller. He paused the game, went into the settings, and turned the game volume up a few notches. Then he unpaused it. My lecture became background noise, a meaningless hum drowned out by digital gunfire and their occasional shouts to each other about in-game strategy. They weren't hostile. They weren't dismissive. They were indifferent. My ideas, my beliefs, the intellectual ammunition I had brought into their space, it was completely irrelevant to them. It didn't register as a threat, an argument, or even an opinion. It was just noise. To start a fight, your opponent has to acknowledge you're even there. And they didn't. It was the most profoundly invalidating experience of my life. I sat there for another 10 minutes, the lecturer's voice drowned out and ignored, before quietly closing my laptop and going back to my room. My whole framework was built on the idea of a power struggle, a conflict between oppressor and oppressed. But what do you do when the oppressor doesn't even know a war is being waged? I looked at my notes. Experiment number 3, ideological provocation. Result, failure. Subjects exhibit extreme apathy. I felt a deep, frustrating confusion. My project was falling apart. The monsters I had come to slay weren't just elusive. They didn't seem to exist at all. I was a ghost hunter in a house that wasn't even haunted. Life settled into a routine. I stopped the active experiments and just existed. I kept to myself, studied, and observed from a distance. I saw them helping each other with difficult coursework without being asked. I saw them sharing food when one guy's meal plan money ran out before the end of the month. I saw their stress before big exams, the way they'd look out for each other, making sure the coffee pot was always full during finals week. They were just people. Young men trying to navigate the pressures of school, money, and figuring out their future. The toxic masculinity I was so sure I would find was nowhere to be seen. What I saw instead was a quiet, constant undercurrent of mutual support. It wasn't expressed in hugs or long talks about feelings. It was expressed in actions, a shared meal, a quiet word of encouragement, a ride to the airport. My worldview was cracked, the foundations crumbling, but I still wasn't ready to abandon it. I told myself I just hadn't seen the right trigger yet. Under the right pressure, the facade would crack, and the truth would come out. Then, sometime last month, the pressure came, and the facade did crack. But what was revealed underneath was not what I expected at all. The guy who became the center of it all was named Ricky. If the dorm floor had a social hub, he was it. Always cheerful, always had a story to tell. He was the one organizing movie nights in the common room or getting a group together to order food. He wasn't loud in an obnoxious way, just present. He had a kind of effortless charisma that made people feel included. Even I, in my self-imposed exile, had exchanged a few friendly greetings with him. He seemed like a genuinely good-natured person. That's why it was so noticeable when he disappeared. One day, he just wasn't around. The usual laughter in the hallway was gone. The door to his room, usually open, was firmly shut. The first day, nobody thought much of it, probably sick or buried in coursework. The second day, a quietness settled over the floor. It was a subtle shift, but I felt it. The atmosphere was heavier. By the third day, there were hushed conversations in the kitchen that would stop the moment I walked in. I knew something was wrong. My first instinct, conditioned by my old mindset, was that he'd done something. A fight, a drunken mistake, something that would reveal the true nature I had been looking for. I just had to wait for the details to emerge. It happened late one night. I couldn't sleep and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The lights were off, but I could see two figures sitting at the small table in the dark, illuminated only by the glow from the window. It was Brett, and another guy I knew was studying law, Sam. I stopped in the doorway, hidden in the shadows of the hall. They were talking in low voices, and I knew I shouldn't listen, but I couldn't help it. They were talking about Ricky. From their fragmented, weary conversation, I pieced together the story. There had been a party off campus a few nights ago. Ricky went with his girlfriend. At some point, some other guy started getting aggressive with her. Wouldn't leave her alone, was getting way too close, making her visibly uncomfortable. Ricky saw it happening. He walked over, put himself between them, and told the guy to back off. Just a calm, firm, "Hey man, that's enough." The guy apparently didn't like being told what to do. He shoved Ricky. Ricky shoved him back, just to create space. It was a defensive move. The guy stumbled, a few drinks were spilled, and that was it. Security came over, the guy's friends pulled him away, and the incident was over in less than a minute. No big brawl, no serious fight. Or so they thought. The next part of the conversation made my blood run cold. The guy who got shoved went to the university administration the next day. But he didn't go alone. He and a group of his friends, along with Ricky's own girlfriend and her friends, filed a formal complaint. Their story was completely different. They claimed Ricky had been possessive and jealous all night, that he had instigated the conflict out of nowhere, exhibiting aggressive and controlling behavior. They said he had violently assaulted the other student without provocation. His own girlfriend was a witness against him. Sam was explaining the mechanics of it to Brett. He said the university's disciplinary board operates on a preponderance of evidence standard, which basically means whoever's story sounds more likely. And right now, the board had the testimony of half a dozen people painting Ricky as the aggressor. Against him was only his own word. He was facing immediate suspension, possibly expulsion. Brett just sat there, shaking his head. He was protecting her, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, hollowed out by disbelief. Sam replied quietly. It doesn't matter what he was doing. It matters what they're saying he was doing. His girlfriend's betrayal was the part they kept coming back to. Why would she do it? Sam had a theory. The social pressure. Once the narrative was set that Ricky's actions were toxic, she had a choice. Either defend him and be labeled an apologist for toxic masculinity herself, or join the chorus and preserve her own social standing. She chose herself. I went back to my room, but I didn't sleep. My entire intellectual framework, everything I thought I knew about power dynamics, was being turned inside out. The system wasn't protecting the vulnerable. The system was being used as a weapon. The narrative I'd been so sure of, men as aggressors, women as victims, was not just wrong in this case, it was inverted. Here was a man being systematically destroyed for committing the crime of acting protectively. He was being sacrificed on the altar of an ideology that demanded a villain, and he was the most convenient one available. The next day, I saw Ricky. He was walking back from what I assumed was a meeting with the dean. He didn't look angry. He looked broken, like he couldn't comprehend how the world had shifted under his feet. The cheerful light in his eyes was gone, replaced by a haunted, confused emptiness. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the pressure point. I watched to see how the other guys would react. Would they mock him for being weak? Tell him to man up? Would they abandon him, afraid of being associated with him? They did none of those things. What they did was something far more powerful. They built a silent fortress around him. The next few days were a masterclass in unspoken male support. I saw Brett cook a huge meal, way more than he would eat himself. He filled a plate, walked down the hall, and just left it outside Ricky's closed door. He didn't knock. He didn't say a word. He just provided for him. Sam spent hours in Ricky's room. I'd see him go in with a laptop and a stack of papers and come out much later, looking exhausted. He was providing his expertise, his time, his knowledge, trying to navigate the bureaucratic maze that was threatening to swallow his friend. The other guys on the floor changed their behavior. The music was kept low. The usual rowdiness in the common room was toned down. It wasn't a somber mood, exactly. It was a mood of quiet solidarity. When Ricky did emerge from his room to go to the kitchen or the bathroom, no one stared. No one asked probing questions. They'd just give him a quiet nod, a simple, "Hey man." They were treating him normally, refusing to let the accusation define him. They were holding a space for him, reminding him that in this building he was still one of them, regardless of what the outside world was saying. They weren't talking about their feelings. They were acting on them. Loyalty, support, and protection were not abstract concepts. They were a plate of food, a legal argument, a respectful silence. I was just an observer, a foreigner watching a tribal ritual I was never meant to understand. I felt powerless, and for the first time, I felt ashamed of my initial mission. I had come here looking for toxicity, and instead, I had found a quiet, profound display of honor. These young men, whom I had written off as privileged and problematic, were showing more integrity than any of the academic theories I had studied. A few days later, I saw something that pushed me from observation to action. I was walking past Sam's room. His door was open, and he was talking to Brett. He was holding his phone, showing Brett the screen. I only caught a glimpse, but it was enough. It was a screenshot of a text conversation. A friend of a friend had sent it to him. It was from Ricky's girlfriend, sent to one of her friends. I couldn't read the whole thing, but one sentence was burned into my memory. I know he was just defending me, but everyone is saying he was toxic, and if I don't agree, they'll come after me too. The smoking gun. It was proof. Proof that this was all a lie, a social cascade of cowardice and self-preservation. Proof that Ricky was telling the truth. Sam and Brett looked defeated. They had proof, but what could they do? If they revealed the screenshot, the person who sent it would be targeted. It was inadmissible, unofficial, just a piece of digital gossip that confirmed a tragedy. That night, I sat in my room, staring at my laptop. My hands were shaking. I could do nothing. I could remain the neutral observer. It wasn't my fight. but I thought about the hollow look in Ricky's eyes. I thought about Brett leaving the plate of food. I thought about Sam sacrificing his study time. I thought about the truth. I opened a new document. I created a new anonymous email address. I wrote a letter to the head of the university's disciplinary committee. I kept it short, factual, and emotionless. I identified myself only as a student who had overheard several conversations regarding the incident. I laid out the version of events I had heard from Sam and Brett. I didn't name them. I described how Ricky had intervened non-violently at first. I described how the story had been twisted. And then, the final paragraph. I stated that I had reason to believe that the primary witness, the girlfriend, was giving a coerced testimony due to social pressure. I wrote that there was likely digital evidence, text messages, that would corroborate this, and that the committee had a duty to perform its due diligence by seeking it out. I read it over a dozen times. Then I clicked send. For a week, nothing happened. The quiet tension on the floor remained. Then, one afternoon, I saw Ricky walk out of his room. He saw Sam coming down the hall. He just looked at him and nodded. And for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of relief on his face. A small, almost imperceptible smile. The rumor mill started up again, but this time the news was good. My anonymous email must have landed on the right desk. Someone with a conscience, maybe. The committee had postponed their ruling and launched a procedural review. They had started re-interviewing people. The official story was starting to crumble under scrutiny. The charges weren't dropped immediately, but the threat of expulsion was gone. It was clear the university knew the case was a mess and wanted it to go away quietly. Life on the floor slowly returned to normal. The music got a little louder. The laughter came back. No one ever mentioned my involvement. No one knew. It was my secret, my one small act of atonement. I deleted all my old notes, the photos of the messy kitchen, the descriptions of my failed experiments, my catalog of imagined slights, all of it. It felt like shedding a skin. The person who had arrived here, so sure of her worldview, so ready to find monsters, was gone. I realized I hadn't come here and found a den of toxicity. I had found a community that functioned on a simple, unspoken code, a code of loyalty, mutual support, and quiet strength. They weren't perfect, but they were good. They took care of their own. A few weeks ago, I was walking back to my room on a Friday night. The door to the common room was open. Most of the guys were in there, watching some dumb action movie on the big TV. Pizza boxes were stacked on the coffee table. As I walked past, Brett looked up. He didn't smile, just gave me his usual neutral look. He pointed a thumb toward the couch. There was one empty spot. "We got pepperoni," was all he said. I hesitated for a second. Then I walked in and sat down. Someone handed me a slice of pizza. I took it. The movie was loud and ridiculous. On screen, a hero was saving the world. But in that worn-out common room, surrounded by these young men I had so badly misjudged, I felt safer than I had in a very long time. My whole academic crusade seemed so naive now, so pointless. You can't understand the world through theories and textbooks. You have to live in it.